Mercedes has chosen George Russell to drive for the team alongside 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton in the 2022 Formula 1 season, replacing Valtteri Bottas. Mercedes has weighed Russell against Bottas before and previously picked the Finn because of his experience, quality and contribution to the Mercedes dynamic. But Russell's case has finally become too strong for Mercedes to ignore. So what does the appointment mean for Russell and his new teammate Hamilton? What qualities have Mercedes seen in Russell that Bottas lacks? And is this the worst possible timing for Bottas, who has had to seek refuge at Alfa Romeo? Russell is a very fast, highly intelligent and extremely ambitious young driver. But for the Mercedes pit stop catastrophe and the puncture he picked up after passing Bottas, Russell would have won the 2020 Sakir Grand Prix on his only appearance for Mercedes to date as the unwell Hamilton stand-in. So what happens when you put Russell alongside Hamilton? Well, it's a thrilling prospect. During the 5 years Bottas has driven for Mercedes, it has become much more Hamilton's team than in the 4 years of the Hamilton-Nico Rosberg lineup. Just through the sheer power of his performances, Hamilton has become the focal point of the team more than was feasible in the Rosberg days. How the dynamic with Russell will work will depend very much upon how Russell measures up in performance. Just as with Bottas, he has not been signed as a support driver, but as someone who will be given equal opportunity. Mercedes boss Toto Wolff made no secret of how team harmony played a very important part in the selection of Bottas as the retiring Rosberg's replacement alongside Hamilton in 2017. After coming off second best in several clashes with Hamilton in 2014 and 15, Rosberg had resolved at the start of 16 that he was not going to back down. He was stepping up the aggression as a deliberate policy. But Bottas simply isn't wired up in the same way that would allow him to be deliberately obstructive or belligerent. And the upshot has been a better Hamilton, who has consistently said he's reaching a higher level of performance than ever before with this dynamic. Is Russell a more combative character? Yes. Everything is internalised with Bottas. He looks for the answers from within himself, and the idea of taking the competition with his teammate into any other dimension of rivalry doesn't come naturally. But with Russell, the mask of cool occasionally slips to reveal a fierce competitor. He makes no secret of his ambition to become world champion. Is Russell fast enough to take on Hamilton? That is an unknown, but on the admittedly small sample of one race for Mercedes, he's at least as quick as Bottas and probably quicker, which would suggest that yes, he should be close enough to make a fight of it on raw speed. Of course, the equation is so much more complex than speed alone, and it cannot be emphasised enough that this would be Lewis Hamilton Russell is taking on, a driver of incredible resolve, deep ability and vast experience. One element of the dynamic is that Russell is potentially the Mercedes succession plan to Hamilton eventually retiring. Hamilton has his own new 2-year deal taking him to the end of 2023, and his perspective might even allow him to embrace a master-apprentice style relationship if he ever makes up his own mind in advance that he will quit at the end of his current contract. Ultimately, Hamilton and Russell are both intelligent and composed and will find a way to work productively together. But it's almost certain to be a more sparky relationship than the one we've seen from Hamilton alongside Bottas. Russell's reputation in F1 has been built on his superb qualifying performances for Williams during the past 2.5 seasons, but Mercedes hasn't signed him simply to be another Mr. Saturday. After all, it effectively already had that in Bottas, a driver with a habit of beating Hamilton in qualifying more often than he could in races when things become more complicated over race stints. Russell's qualifying statistics are remarkable. He's only been out-qualified once by a teammate in 51 outings in Formula 1, with his sole defeat a narrow one to Bottas during his one-off for Mercedes. He's also become increasingly strong at making steps with each run in qualifying, a crucial skill for a driver who will be expected to be a regular pole position contender with Mercedes. His capacity to pull the lap together when the pressure is at its highest was shown at Spa, with his stunning front row effort in the wet. The problem is that Russell has struggled to translate his qualifying heroics into points. He has had some high-profile failures, notably what he called his amateur crash under the safety car at Imola last year and the poor final standing restart at Mugello. Russell was also on course for points at Imola this year when he took to the grass while attempting to pass Bottas and was pitched into the side of the Mercedes. While the offset between Russell's qualifying results and race results is startling on paper, it's more a legacy of extracting close to the maximum from the Williams in qualifying and starting ahead of cars that are fundamentally quicker. Russell's tyre management is good and he potentially has an advantage over Bottas on this score. He's also done a good job of dealing with a Williams that has been very wind sensitive at times this year, another area that Bottas has occasionally struggled with in races for Mercedes. There are aspects of Russell's race performances that do need work. In the 13 race starts this year, including the Silverstone Sprint, Russell has gained positions 3 times, held position 4 times and lost out 6 times. His launches aren't considered problematic, but his decision making in terms of car positioning on the opening lap has sometimes not paid off, and he does sometimes struggle to pick when to attack and when to consolidate. However, Russell tends to execute races to a higher quality than he gets credit for. When he had his big chance in the Mercedes, he drove a great race and should have taken a sensational win. He also broke his Williams duck with 8th place in this year's Hungarian Grand Prix and showed no signs of throwing away that opportunity. He also converted his 2nd place on the grid at Spa into a first F1 podium. Okay, he didn't have to do anything on race day in that situation, but at least he didn't bin it on the way to the grid like Sergio Perez. So yes, Russell may be known as Mr. Saturday, but there's far more to his game than a quick qualifying lap. But what of the driver Russell's replacing? Well, there's a strong argument to be made that Bottas might have been better served losing his Mercedes seat a year ago. Bottas' stock is clearly lower now than in the summer of 2020, but he also had considerably fewer alternatives to pursue as well, and it's the lack of options that made the timing so unfortunate. He might not command one of the best seats in Formula 1 anymore, but he's a multiple Grand Prix winner, he's a tremendously good qualifier, and he has valuable experience of F1's most successful team. As a package, Bottas is too good to be sliding to a back-end team like Alfa Romeo to spend his time potentially struggling to get out of Q1. Unfortunately, the seats on the grid between Mercedes and this team are all taken. Had Bottas lost his drive for 2021, the options available to him would have been plentiful. Depending on the timing, everywhere would have been on the cards, except maybe Ferrari, given the team had its heart set on Carlos Sainz over the winter to replace Sebastian Vettel. Still, had Bottas been available in the early months of 2020, or at least been able to seriously look around, then Red Bull and the other major midfield players like McLaren, Alpine and Aston Martin would all have been potential destinations. Red Bull was clearly not interested in promoting Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon was not inspiring confidence, and the only alternatives turned out to be Sergio Perez, who was previously not rated particularly highly, and an out-of-work Nico Hülkenberg. With Mercedes boss Wolff as part of his management team, it seems unlikely Bottas would have been able to orchestrate a move to Mercedes' chief rival, but there would have been a case to be made and a seat to chase. What about the midfield alternatives? Well, McLaren committed to Daniel Ricciardo before the delayed start to the 2020 season, Alpine ultimately chose to bring Fernando Alonso back from his sabbatical, and Aston Martin moved for the displaced Vettel. All those options may still have been preferred to Bottas, it's impossible to say, but it's highly unlikely Bottas would have been instantly dismissed by all 3. The point is that there would have been a lot more options open to Bottas than there actually were, so he's unfortunate to be losing his Mercedes drive at a time that means he may well drop to the very back of the grid. With no disrespect intended to Alfa Romeo, it's not a team that can immediately satisfy the ambitions of a 9-time Grand Prix winner. But how do you think Bottas is going to fare in his new project? What do you make of Russell joining Mercedes, and how do you think he'll get on alongside Hamilton? Have your say in the comments, hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already to join us again for more videos in the future.